Now, back in June 1st of this year, Andy Ruiz II shocked the world by beating Anthony Joshua in New York City to claim the WBA, IBF, WBO and IBO heavyweight titles this coming weekend. They do it all again, but the venue for this second meeting of the pair seems to have taken up more of the conversation than the actual duel that we'll see in Diriyah this coming weekend. Joining us to talk about all that on the line from The Guardian, there's their chief sports reporter, Sean Ingle. Sean, you're very welcome back to the show. As we mentioned, it is the discourse around the venue and the choice of venue of Saudi Arabia has taken up much of the conversation for this fight. What's it been like on the ground in your day or two that you've had there so far?
It's unusual, as you'd expect. Joshua and Ruiz are both sort of saying, well, it's business as normal. They're breaking new ground. Eddie Hearn keeps talking about how historic it is to come to the Middle East. He's likened it to the Thriller in Manila and the Rumble in the Jungle, saying, Joshua, his legacy won't be tarnished by this. It'll just make him even bigger because of what he's done. Meanwhile, the same questions from human rights groups keep coming. But for now, they're being deflected by all the protagonists here. Unfortunately,
I get by highlighting Zaire and by highlighting the Thriller in Manila, what Eddie Hearn and Anthony Joshua do almost by accident is suggest that what's happening here in Saudi Arabia is pretty similar to what went on there, because nobody talks about Zaire in light of Mobutu and all that kind of stuff that went on and all of his ills as president of that country at the time of the Ali Foreman fight. We just talk about the fight, and it's a similar situation here, and I guess that's what he's hoping for, is that people will just talk about Ruiz Joshua too. There won't be any mention in his mind, or there won't be any connection between the fight and the appalling human rights record of Saudi Arabia.
Hearn's position, I spoke to him about this a couple of nights ago in quite a lot of depth. He argues that it's his job as a promoter to go to Joshua and say, here are your choices. Cardiff are offering this, Madison Square are offering that. Oh, we've just had a late bid from Saudi Arabia. Where do you want to go? And he said to me, if I was to say to Joshua, don't come to Saudi Arabia, he would say, see ya, goodbye. So, he's putting the ball on Joshua's court. And Joshua, who I think likes to come to the Middle East, he often goes on holidays in Dubai. He has made that decision himself. His last fight, people say he made 30, 35 million. Here, it's reported to be in excess of 60 million. So it is the money that's doing it. But I think whenever I've spoken to Joshua before about this and human rights, he goes, I can't just put on my cape and save the world. It's not up to me to do that. So that's his justification really for coming here, to almost say I'm making history and to almost ignore the criticisms from Amnesty and others.
Is it disappointing that he doesn't find a way of voicing an opinion on the country itself that he's fighting in and their fairly recent and fairly public human rights record?
I guess once you make that initial decision, you're locked in. You're locked and loaded. You're not suddenly going to turn around and say, I'll take the 60 million and then speak out. But I think actually what Amnesty have asked him, is a reasonable middle ground. They've said to him, you can take the fight, but please read up on some of the appalling cases. There's been women that before the driving ban was rescinded, protested about wanting to drive and are still in prison now. Amnesty said, read up about that. They've asked him to speak out, to speak to the regime, and he hasn't done that. So, but I think really once he made the decision to come here, the die was cast really.
There are those that argue as well on the other side of it that, Saudi money is involved in sport in so many different ways. It's been involved in horse racing, for instance, since time immemorial. The Premier League has untold Gulf resources plunged into it in the past few years. How is this different?
I think that's not unreasonable. I think also you can look at the British government. How many years has it sold arms to Saudi Arabia? How many stores do we see here? The Gucci's, the Versace's. I just think though that you can't ignore it. At least be upfront with why you're coming here. And I think Eddie Hearn has today sort of said yes, it's the money, but Joshua has talked more about doing it for the sport of boxing, which I think isn't really right.
Yeah, that doesn't really wash. Like, there's not going to be a bunch of young kids giving tickets to this fight who are suddenly going to rock up and decide that they want to be heavyweight boxers based on what they've seen between Anthony Joshua and Andy Ruiz. That, like, it's just, that's a non-issue, building the sport. And I've heard it used in a number of instances surrounding events in Saudi Arabia and similar places, is that, like, there's not a case for the sport to be built from here. Now, you had a blog on The Guardian talking about this issue a couple of weeks ago, and you had a quote from Professor Simon Chadwick from Salford Business School. He was talking about geopolitics, and he says, it's difficult to identify a country anywhere in the world that has fundamentally and sustainably changed for the better as a result of sport. And that's ultimately what's going to happen here. This is going to exist in its own little bubble, in its own little vacuum, and have little or no impact on the general populace around them.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think what you, at the most, you can hope for is a few micro changes. So we met the head of the Saudi sports authorities, and I won't try and butcher his name, but it was Prince Abdulaziz bin Turki, and his view is that 2015 the Saudis looked at how many people in their population exercise more than 30 minutes a week, and it was only 13%. And he says this fight is part of a much wider package of things to get the Saudis more active. In response, I said, well, if you want to do that, why don't you let the women, more women use, mixed gyms? There's a colleague of mine in another hotel that the women are allowed to swim 1 hour a day in that swimming pool. And I said, why don't you, make sure that's changed? And his response was, well, things take time, and we are changing. 2 years ago, women couldn't watch a football match, couldn't watch this fight. Now they can. We recently sent 7 women's teams to an event in Kuwait. So I think that you speak to people here, they say there are small changes, but they're in a very narrow framework. We're not going to have masses of changes here, fundamental change, but you may get small changes around the edges.
What kind of percentage of the general public, what is the profile of the crowd that's actually going to show up to this purpose-built stadium in Diriyah this Saturday? What's that going to look like, do we reckon?
Well, the 15,000 seats, I'm told it's going to be a sellout. 2,500 have come from Britain, and I think they're claiming that 60 different countries, people are going to be here. I think one thing that will be different about, say, places like Doha, which recently struggled at the World Athletics Championship. Saudi Arabia has a population of 30 million, so I think the locals are at least interested. How deep that goes, I don't know. I spoke to a guy from a Saudi website the other day, and he sort of was saying, there was no interest 2 years ago. Now there is some interest. So I don't know. I'm not convinced that boxing gyms going to sprout out all over the country and people are going to suddenly become massive interest in the sport. But I think it will be a sellout. I think there's no doubt, and they're very confident of that. So.
It's something like this is a case that's going to come up over and over again in different sports. UFC signed a long-term deal with the government there, the sports ministry. Even people like WWE have held events there to much criticism within the community. The Spanish Super Cup is going to be expanded and heading there as well. Like, this is something that we're going to have to revisit over and over again, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, the Prince said today that they are looking at other events, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if Formula One is in Saudi Arabia in the next 5 years. He denied they were coming for Manchester United. But yeah, I mean, it is definitely, they have the money to basically get whatever they want, really, or bring whatever event they want here. And they are very keen to do that. At the moment, they admit there's a premium. They have to pay more for various events, but they hope that within time that will change. But yeah, if Joshua can almost double his money by coming here, that's clearly tempting him. And a bunch of tennis players are coming here for an exhibition next week.
If they do happen to lower their fees, or if they do find themselves being talked down to lower prices, and that's going to lessen the attractiveness, I guess, of going there, would it not?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. But I think the premium is so high at the moment that they have a lot of willing takers.
Like, in terms of how it is to prepare for a fight, have you noticed much difference in how you're able to kind of move around the place? Is security heightened because of what's going on there at the weekend? You mentioned your female colleagues unable to go for mad long swims in the hotel pool. Is it a massive adjustment to get ready for a fight there?
It is different. I was in Doha a couple of months ago, and it's more conservative than Doha. The people are very friendly. The general, you pop into the supermarket and so on, but it is a different place. It's not, when you're at a big sporting event, whether it's a football match or a boxing fight, You often see the posters everywhere. You're speaking to taxi drivers and they're talking about it. You don't get that sense here at all.
Yeah.
And then the venue itself is about half an hour drive outside the capital. Essentially, it's built on a bunch of ruins, and I'm yet to sort of make the leap from thinking it will be something that will captivate the world and make millions of people want to come here. But maybe I'll be proved wrong. But it's more, I think, about projecting Saudi Arabia's soft power and perhaps trying to get more people in the country to take up the sport than really, really making a long-term plan to make it the mecca of boxing, as Joshua called it yesterday.
How mindful do you think the government are there of the criticism that's been thrown at them?
We asked them about it today, and they said yes, we're not perfect. But we can't. We're moving. We can't move too fast because there are some parts of our country that are conservative. We've got to strike a balance, etc., and so on. It's their position.
Yeah. I think ultimately what they hope for is not a boring fight and actually something to remember within the confines of the ring on Saturday night. Sean Ingle, thanks so much for taking time out to speak to us this evening.